Okay, hello everyone. I'm Vanessa Brown, and it's a great honor to be here and participate in this historic session of the Permanent Peoples Tribunal on fracking, climate change, and human rights. I really enjoyed listening to so many dedicated, compassionate, and courageous people from all over the world talk about these issues. Today I am representing 350 Vermont and the Green Mountain Druid Order. And I'm also representing myself. I'm a single mother and an attorney, and I feel that I'm deeply impacted by climate change and fracking. I believe, as many other people have said during this tribunal, that climate change is deeply a spiritual problem as well as a scientific one. And many people in Vermont also share those feelings. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit before I get started on sharing some of the testimony from Vermonters who have been working on fracking issues and climate change issues for many years, a little bit about my background. I am a former intern with the Spring Creek Project. I have founded an organization, the White River Reconciliation Project. I've worked with the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in DC. I've been working on the Corvallis, Oregon Mayor's Office on Sustainability projects when I was a student. I've worked with VPIRG in Vermont on their clean energy program. And while I was in law school, I studied, in addition to environmental law, I studied energy law and specifically hydraulic fracturing technology and the economics that are associated with it. Some of my past work includes advising state and federal government officials and other legal professionals during the BP oil spill. I grew up along the Juniata River in Bel County in Pennsylvania in the Marcellus Shale region. And between 2006 and 2009, I monitored the Kiger Island site for the Willamette Riverkeeper in Oregon. So here I am today, and my job is to present the testimony of Vermonters who have been leading the efforts to transition our state away from fossil fuel dependence and are presently challenging the development of a fracked gas pipeline in Vermont. Vermont was the first state in the nation to ban hydraulic fracturing and the disposal of fracked wastewater because of its obvious human rights impacts due to the contamination of the water and the soil. And I'm also going to be sharing with you the testimony of the Grand Riverkeeper in Oklahoma, who has been fighting fracking down there. And so after the video, I'll go ahead and take any questions or make some recommendations, but I think we're ready to go. And thanks so much for having me here today.
Good morning. My name is Brian Tocar. I'm a lecturer in environmental studies at the University of Vermont, board member of 350 Vermont and the Institute for Social Ecology, and the author and editor of several books, most recently this one, which is called Toward Climate Justice, Perspectives on the Climate Crisis and Social Change, which first came out in 2010 and was substantially revised and expanded in 2014. We're gathered today in a really important place. This is Japrag's Community Park in the town of Heinsberg, Vermont, about a half hour from Burlington. The events around Japrag's Park were the apex of a 4 or 5 year campaign, which is still ongoing, to stop the construction of a new gas pipeline to transport fracked gas from Canada down the western side of Vermont. At the same time that Vermont has banned fracking for gas or oil in state, we're continuing to import large quantities of gas, and the gas company, which is Canadian owned, had planned on continuing to expand this pipeline pretty far south to connect up with all the infrastructure that would allow it to eventually transport fracked gas from the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and Ohio through Vermont to Canada. The campaign at this point has not succeeded in stopping the first leg of the pipeline, but a portion that was supposed to go underneath Lake Champlain to fuel a huge paper mill was stopped, and we believe that we've set things in motion that may eventually shut down this pipeline, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that this morning, and certainly prevent the gas company from extending this pipeline any further. The campaign against the pipeline here in Vermont has also inspired a statewide campaign calling for no new fossil fuel infrastructure in the state of Vermont. And in early March, on our annual town meeting day, 36 towns all across Vermont passed resolutions calling for an end to the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and work toward alternatives. These campaigns have in many ways been inspired by the themes of climate justice that are very much resonant with the human rights principles that are central to this tribunal. The climate justice movement, of course, highlights the disproportionate impacts of climate changes on those people around the world who are least responsible for the problem of excess emissions. It brings forward the leadership of the frontline communities that are most affected, and also embodies an understanding that the institutions responsible for abuses of the environment, like fracking and all of the other causes of climate change, are the same institutions that are responsible for a wide array of other social and economic injustices that we face. So we believe that climate change is fundamentally a human rights issue. This movement is also focused on an understanding of moving toward solutions to the climate problem that go beyond the realm of the technical, that really embrace a different outlook on how we want to organize our lives, how we want to organize our communities. Here in Vermont, we have many models of people living very well at much lower levels of consumption than are considered the norm in the US and throughout the industrialized world. And we continue to focus on community-based solutions to allow us to live better on this earth, to challenge the institutions responsible for various abuses, and really look toward a very different kind of future.
My name is Rachel Smolker. I'm a resident here in Heinsberg. And a couple of years ago, I got involved in fighting this pipeline that's going through the state of Vermont, because it was coming through this beautiful park, which is our only public park in the town. This land was granted to the town by Dora Japrags, who was a resident here for a long time. And in the deed of transfer, it was specified that the park would be used only for educational, recreational purposes or for a school. And when Vermont Gas came along and said they wanted to build a pipeline through the middle of this park, it created a lot of divisions in the town, and those divisions are still festering and haven't fully been healed. We took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled against us, and the pipeline is now installed over behind me in the distance there. When we sort of got to the end point with the Supreme Court, we didn't feel we were done fighting this pipeline, because we know that this pipeline has at least a 50-year lifespan or so, and we figured if we could stop it even tomorrow or a year from now or 10 years from now or even 20 years from now, we would still be coming out way ahead. We spent a lot of time researching and watching how the construction was being done, and the more we learned about pipeline engineering and how the contracting crew was working and seeing what was going on, we realized this pipeline was being slapdashed into the ground as hastily as possible and with just reckless disregard for our environment and our safety. And we did many, many public records requests, and ultimately we went to the federal regulating body, PIMSA. We said, you need to look into this. The state is not doing their job of oversight. This is a danger to our communities. I started out with this being a climate activist for a long time, and I was concerned about fracking, and I was concerned about the pipeline from the perspective of the impacts of methane leaking from infrastructure. But after learning and watching how the pipeline itself was constructed, my concerns now are more for the safety of people who live along the pipeline route. Because we know that, for example, they put the pipeline into the trenches that they dug too shallow in some locations. They didn't put the proper select backfill and padding around the pipeline in some places. They didn't compact the padding around the pipeline safely the way they're supposed to in some places. We know that they didn't install trench breakers that were meant to prevent water from leaking out where they cross streams and around the edges of wetlands. We know that they were lacking a quality assurance program through much of the construction of the pipeline. There was regulations that the federal authorities required, which are considered minimum standards. And then the state had requested a lot of improvements upon that through a certificate of public good in our Act 248 process. And the company came and told the state they were going to do all sorts of things to ensure that this went far above the minimum federal standards. But nobody came out and enforced and looked and watched to see what they were doing and ensure that they actually followed the agreements that they had made with the people of Vermont. And so now, after very hastily getting the pipeline into the ground, turning on the gas flow, telling everybody, yo, we're providing cheap, affordable, clean gas for all you eager customers out there, we are saddled with this very, very dangerous pipeline.
I'm Lisa Barrett, and I live in Huntington, Vermont. And for just the last 2 years, I have been deeply involved in this effort to stop the Vermont fracked-gas pipeline in Vermont. And looking at it from the point of view of human rights, it seems to me there's a human right to clean water, there's a human right not to be subjected to human-made earthquakes, and there is a human right not to be killed for something as insubstantial as corporate greed. I first got involved in this fight thinking that fracking was a terrible thing, and it was incredibly hypocritical that this state that has banned fracking would allow a fracked gas pipeline, and that the state would embrace the state government would embrace a fracked gas pipeline. I also first became involved because I was aware that in 2015 there was a heat wave in Pakistan and India that was definitely caused by our climate emergency. And that heat wave killed at least 2,500 people. And there is no doubt that that was caused by our climate change emergency. Now, 2,500 people, that's pretty close to the number of people who were killed on 9/11. When people were killed on 9/11, this country pulled out all the stops, started spending billions of dollars to kill people in the Middle East and to make us jump through security hoops every time we wanted to do something. But 2,500 people dying in Pakistan and India because of a heat wave that brought the temperatures to 130 degrees has not caused us to do anything to stop fracking, to stop fossil fuel infrastructure. And the hypocrisy of that is overwhelming to me. People have a right to live without fear. And too many people in our little state of Vermont who live along the pipeline route are living in fear. And they're living in well-founded fear. What causes them to be living in the incineration zone of a compressed gas pipeline? It's corrosion that causes most of the explosions. We haven't had any explosions in Vermont. The pipeline is brand new. But we have gas under pressure, 600 pounds per square inch. We have pipe lying on the soil that has rocks in it that can rub holes in it. We have pipe with joins that may not be properly sealed. And we have pipes that are running miles under high voltage electric transmission lines. And that electricity can be conducted by the pipeline, and the cathodic protection and other methods that are used to protect the pipeline from carrying that electricity are not working. I'm one of the people, the small group of people, who has poured over thousands of pages of documents to see how this pipeline was built. And this pipeline has been built with a risk here and a risk there and a risk in another place, and when you add up all those risks, it is terrifying for people who live near this pipeline. We have to stop fracking, and we have to stop fossil fuel infrastructure, and we have to keep people from having to live in fear from a gas pipeline.
My name is Nathan Palmer. I own Laughing Tree Farm in Moncton, Vermont. I'm one of the landowners that has been directly impacted by this pipeline. And when they decided to lay this pipe, it was in 2012, and they made a chart for the original route that was like so offensive to everyone that was along it. So in the process of calming down some of the people, they rerouted the pipeline, and that's when it came directly across our farm. My immediate response was, what's this going to do to my soil? What's this going to do to my water? I called the hydrogeologist and asked him, what's this going to do to my water? He came over and did an investigation. I called an agronomist at UVM and said, what's this going to do to my soil? Am I just freaking out here? She said, well, send me the information on how they're going to build this and I'll take a look at it, because you are kind of an excitable guy, and maybe you are, getting too excited. I sent her the information. She came back with a report and said, if they do this construction the way they say they're going to do it, it will be 20 years at least for your soil to recover, because I have heavy clay soil, and even though I'm not organic farm, I farm organically, and there's just no way that the soil would be able to recover. The hydrogeologist said the same thing. This is heavy clay soil. You cut a 5-foot trench through this land, you're going to change the water flow in many directions, and none of them good. So we took that to the testimony and presented it to the Public Service Board. And we were hoping that by bringing this information to the board, that they would adjust the way the pipeline was built across the entire length of it. Instead, they adjusted how they were going to deal with our particular farm, as if our land was special and no other land is special. And the reality is, all land is special, all water is special. What I really have a problem with here is that we're sacrificing our water for fuel, and that is a terrible situation to put society, to put anyone in, where you have to make a choice between whether you're going to be able to drink or whether you're going to be able to drive your car. Because what happens is those that can afford to will drive their vehicles, heat their houses, and drink their water, and those who are on limited income are the ones who are going to have to decide, do I buy a gallon of water or do I buy a gallon of fuel to keep my house warm? It sounds kind of like out there a little bit, but the reality is that water is precious and we don't value it the way that we should. It's like a commodity that we can get rid of real easily and we can come up with real easily, and it's obviously getting harder and harder. You can take that water and you can reclaim it enough that you can reuse it for fracking, but you'll never be able to drink it, you'll never be able to feed your animals with it, you'll never be able to sustain a life with it. And that's really what it comes down to. Are we going to have a livable planet where people can live on and enjoy their life, or are we going to have a place that's run, by people that have a big pile of money in their bank accounts, and the rest of us are just, going to have to fend for it the best way we can. I was really hoping that after the pipe was built, I could put this to bed and not have to deal with it anymore. But the reality is that it was built in a way that's so slipshod, you don't even want to live there. They told me when they first were going to put this pipe through, it's like, once we put this pipe through, you'll forget it's there. If you forget it's there, that's where you're going to have trouble, and it's going to get really serious.
I'm Earl Hatley. I'm Grand River Keeper for the Grand River Watershed. My organization is lead agency. I'm Chickamauga, Cherokee. I belong to the Longhair clan. Fracking started in Oklahoma around 2007. Oklahoma was lied to about what was causing the increasing earthquakes over time. In 2013, the earthquakes began increasing tremendously. I had been fighting TransCanada and the Army Corps of Engineers, who were building the Keystone XL pipeline southern leg from Cushing, Oklahoma to the Gulf. So I really couldn't turn to that at that point in time. The Keystone XL southern leg was going to send tar sands and fracked oil from the Bakken region up in North Dakota. And they had been sending it down to Cushing another way through a TransCanada spur from Nebraska to Cushing. Cushing is the largest terminal in North America, and it's the crossroads for pipelines. If you saw a pipeline map in Cushing, a plate of spaghetti would look more organized. I mean, it's massive. And so is the terminal park. And right now, about half of it is now Enbridge. TransCanada had a good part of it at one point in time when they were building the pipeline. So in 2014, I got a letter from Devon Energy. They wanted to come onto my property that I still own in Payne County, where most of the earthquakes were occurring, and explore for gas or for oil. And I threw the letter away, and then a couple of weeks later I got another letter saying I didn't respond to the first letter. And so I looked it up and found that they could come onto my property anyway. So I wrote them, and then I called them and I told them I didn't want any part of it, and they weren't welcome to come onto my property. And they said, well, we'll work around you. And I said, well, I don't think my neighbors want you either. About 3 weeks later, I got another letter giving me 10 days to respond, or they were going to go to court and get authorization to come onto my land anyway. I organized citizens groups and a statewide group, and Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is the capital seat of Payne County, passed ordinances for oil and gas within the city limits, which in effect keeps them out of the city limits of Stillwater. And they passed that 2 weeks after the state legislature passed a law saying the cities couldn't do that. And they'd been threatened lawsuits, but nobody's done anything, so their ordinances stand. And so we're really proud of them. I can't come onto my property anymore because I now have 8 frack wells in my square mile in my section, and a disposal well a mile and a half away. And I have an autoimmune disease, so when I go to my property, within 5 minutes I start getting headaches and I start getting sick. And the longer I stand there, the sicker I get, and it takes me about 3 weeks to recover when I go back home where I live. In 2016 we had 10,000 earthquakes, maybe more than that. And the USGS is saying that even if they stop now, we're still going to have a 6 point or 6.5 or even larger in our future, probably several of them. because of all the faults that they've awakened now. And some of our people that called in to the Corporation Commission about their homes being destroyed were told, well, you should be proud because you're contributing to our independence on oil, and boys won't have to go to the Middle East to fight. You know, so that's your sacrifice. Most people don't have earthquake insurance because we're not an earthquake state. So their homes didn't come with earthquake insurance. And the few that did, the insurance companies won't insure homes that are damaged by man-made earthquakes. You know, people are stuck with damaged homes in the 14 counties where the earthquakes are happening, where the fracking is happening. And now fracking is coming back because the price of oil was high. So they're just going down and widening roads and getting ready for huge infrastructure of oil and gas exploration in these counties. And the earthquakes are going to be coming back big time. Now they're drilling more shallow wells to get at the oil that's more shallow, so more and more groundwater is going to be contaminated. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Fern Lichfield, and I am here from the Green Mountain Druid School and community. I'm based in Worcester, Vermont. I teach a lot about how to be a steward and how to connect more deeply with the spirit of place. You know, before there were individual religions with different gods, all of our ancestors, if you trace them back far enough, come from a place of animism. And this is just understanding that everything is alive and all life is sacred. And that means that we are connected to everything else because the same spirit that animates the tree animates us. And so when we remember this, and I love the word remember, it's about pulling all of our pieces back together and remembering that we're not on top of this evolutionary pyramid, we're actually in a web and we are connected to everything. So that means that everything that we do affects everything else. And so it's very much about taking responsibility. It's about understanding that the health of the human is deeply dependent on the health of the land and on the water and on the air. And it means that also health is not just about this level of physical, you know, it's not just our bodies. We know that as humans, for us to feel healthy, we have to pay attention not only to our physical health, but to our mental health and our spiritual health. And so we also look at that at the macrocosm level with the land. And it really has a lot to do with slowing down enough to listen and to hear what the land and the waters need from us.
So thanks for listening to the testimony from Vermont folks and Earl and Hatley in Oklahoma. We have come together and talked through some recommendations to make to the tribunal. We don't agree on all of them, but we have a few that we'd like to suggest as far as what we think should be done. We would like to see the tribunal issue an order requiring all the fossil fuel companies to immediately disclose the chemicals that are contained in the injection fluids and to clean up the waters of the earth. We'd like all fracking operations to take immediate action to tighten controls on infrastructure and prevent methane leaks. We would also like to see the immediate phase out of all fracking and other fossil fuel operations. We would like national and state governments to be prevented from issuing new permits for fossil fuel infrastructure. We would like all fracking companies to, as an alternative, have all fracking companies implement state-of-the-art measures to prevent leakage, and we'd like to shut down fracking sites where groundwater protections are clearly failing. And finally, we'd like for the tribunal to impose steep and strict sanctions on public officials that refuse to comply with these orders. So that's what we've got. And I Thank you so much for being here and allowing us to tell you our stories.
Thank you. Well, I'm not one of the judges, but I do have a question
Sure.
about the difference between regulating, strictly regulating fracking and banning fracking. Some people have argued that it can't be regulated sufficiently enough to be protected. And that the only way to protect human and nature's rights would be to ban it. So where are you on that question of the?
I would think that I would agree, as well as the other individuals who testified today would agree that fracking cannot be regulated with and protect human rights at the same time, that they're exclusive, that the technology is fundamentally violates human rights and the rights of nature, that it is for a number of reasons. You have greenhouse gas emissions. I believe in my brief I had highlighted some science that concluded that fracking exacerbates climate change, and that the emissions from it are they're much higher, and so if you were to regulate it, it would be a half measure that doesn't affect CO2 levels in the atmosphere. So it would not get the job done, basically. Ineffective.
Thank you. Gail, you got any questions?
No, I just wanted to follow up. So I take it that your, as we say here, your ambit claim would be to ban fracking, but you made some recommendations or requests to the tribunal less than that, and I guess well,
Yes.
It must be that you reckon that in addition to asking for a ban, we ought to, in the meantime, until that can be worked out, suggest certain measures that might help to mitigate the damage.
So provisional measures, yes. When we discussed an outright ban, suggesting an outright ban to you, a lot of folks laughed. They said, "Oh, we wish that would happen. That that would be an order that would be complied with." And so we think that is what needs to happen. But we see that it's likely not going to happen.
Well,
like they're not going to be, yeah.
It's David and Goliath at the moment, isn't it? But
yes.
Goliath may be weakening and David may be getting stronger. Just one point, I missed it. I wasn't quite sure. Could you tell me, when Earl Hatley was talking, he said he was a Vermont resident, but was the example he was giving was actually from Oklahoma? Is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Earl has moved part-time to Vermont mainly because of his inability to stay on his property, and so
He didn't want to be homeless.
right.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Really, really good.
Good.
I have a nephew who has a place in Vermont, and I visited about a year ago. Actually, less than, it was in the middle of, it was in January. I found it very cold, but I could see
Yes.
it's nice, well worth fighting for, to protect. Yeah, it's a beautiful area.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much.